We are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the launch of the Lady. The Lady has survived an extraordinary number of changes over half a century, an extraordinary number of changes. But we're going back to the early days of the Lady, and after the ships were seized by the towing company on the 3rd of March 1968 to cover unpaid debts, it looked like the end of the road, or indeed the end of the water, for Radio Caroline, north and south. But the Mi Amigo was reacquired, and on the 30th of September 1972, it made its first transmission in over 4 years. So, to steer us through the ups and downs of Caroline in the first part of the early 70s, your moderator is the first disc jockey to be prosecuted under the Marine Etc. Broadcasting Offences Act of 1967, the notorious Andy Archer.
From a point at sea to the circles in your mind, this is the new Radio Caroline.
Well, good afternoon. Apparently we all worked together on the Mi Amigo back in the 1970s, and I'm sure as we continue it will confirm my thoughts that we did in fact work together. It's not just a figment of my imagination. Before we go on, I'd just like to thank Hans Knott and Martin van der Ven and the late Robb Althoff for organising this amazing day today. So yes. Thank you very much. Yeah. Before I introduce the panel, we decided we'd dedicate our little spot to Tony Allen, because this year is the 10th anniversary of Tony's death, a much-loved colleague who passed away 10 years ago. He was certainly one of the most talented broadcasters I ever worked with, and a great character, and blessed, of course, with one of the most remarkable radio voices of all time. So our panel here, Rob Eden was a close friend of Tony. Can we start with you, Rob? Your memories of Tony?
My memories of Tony were so many memories, not only from the ship, but behind the scenes as well, on a personal level. I think the one thing that always struck me about Tony was the fact that he did know something about everything, and not being big-headed. If you asked him a question, he would always know something about it. And there was a time where I was trying to learn French. My language skills is abysmal, and I tried to learn some French, and Tony, it was like water off a duck's back. His linguistic skills were fantastic, and he could learn a language more or less instantly by reading a book. He was just one of those characters who had this amazing ability to gel with everybody because of his professional ability, but also because he did know a lot, he had seen a lot, he became involved in a lot of things. On the ship, he was a very difficult character sometimes to get along with for many people. And he provoked a number of incidents that I won't go into here, but they certainly caused some consternation for his shipmates. But he was a wonderful character, larger than life, and we still think of him.
On my right is my old friend Johnny Jason. Johnny, you've got some good memories of Tony, I'm sure.
Indeed, Andy. And I mean, I think Robbie said some very fine words there about Tony. Tony was a very special person. Very inspirational. On the air, he was very unpredictable, which I think made him very special, because you never quite knew what he was going to come out with next. He played some very nice music, and as far as being a colleague on board is concerned, yes, as Robbie said, he was a little bit, we were all a bit temperamental, let's face it, in those conditions. But he was someone who really cared for people too, when we hadn't had too much to drink. And a very special person, and we really do miss him a lot.
Paul Alexander, you had some run-ins with Tony, I'm sure.
I've had one or two run-ins with Tony. I actually slept with Tony on the HS station one night. We slept on a bench. We were waiting for the cafe to up. Is this working? Yeah.
It's nice that you're so open about your sexuality, Paul.
Tony and I were on our way back from some restaurant one evening. We couldn't get in. We couldn't remember the way. So Caroline had a flat at the Waldorpslaan, and we couldn't remember how to get in. And if we did, we didn't know which window you had to climb in. And so we ended up spending the night on the railway station, the HS station. But Tony really explored your head, and he would completely psychoanalyze you in 5 minutes and then spend 2 hours trying to teach you the wrongs of whatever you were doing. And I arrived at Caroline as a young 18-year-old club disc jockey, armed only with a ticket to go and send Morse code from ships. And I think Tony, Mr. Houlihan, Jimmy Houlihan, who was Ronan's right-hand man and minder, Lord Archer and Dick Palmer, they straightened me out, and they're responsible for... I've had a fabulous life ever since.
I've never been accused of straightening anybody out.
Well, you certainly did, and my eternal thanks. Let's have... Andy has actually worked in the 60s, the 70s and the 80s in radio, as well as the 90s and other BBC philandering since. And there aren't many jocks that have done that. I think Roger Day is probably the only one. So I think Lord Archer deserves a big round of ammunition as well.
Well... By the way, I've just had a text from Johnny Walker. His plane lands at 2:30 any moment now, so Johnny will be here within the next 2 hours, 3 hours. Graham Gill, always a delight to see you, Graham, who's just out of hospital. You're looking well, Graham.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, the hospital gave me a bit of a scare for a while, and I've had my gallbladder out now, so I'm managing to cope and get on with life.
Have you heard of the saying, too much information, Graham?
Oh, no. But you were talking earlier about Tony
Allen, yeah.
Tony and memories of Tony. I first met Tony in my well-appointed home in the Blasierstraat, a well-appointed street in Amsterdam. And I was having brunch one day, and I just fed my cat Morcher when the doorbell rang. And I had a small kitchen, so the kitchen window, I lifted it up and I said, who are you? And he said, I'm Tony. I'm Jack's friend. And I said, Jack who? He said, Jack McLaughlin. Well, of course, Jack and I used to work on Radio 3NO together in those early days. So I said, oh, you better come in, I'll put the kettle on. So up came Tony, and that was our first meeting. And as Andy has just already described Tony, I have the same feelings too. He was an outgoing sort of guy, called a spade when he wanted to, but for the rest he was a pleasure to work with as a colleague, and also a pleasure to be, and has been, always a good friend to me.
Absolutely.
Well, some memories there of the great Tony Allen. We're particularly delighted because one of our number, who certainly Johnny and Robb and myself and a few others haven't seen in over 40 years, is the greatest cook that offshore radio has ever known, and also a wonderful presenter in the early hours of the morning.
Yes.
And that's Mickey Mercer, who's sitting on the end. And now Mickey's joined us today from Arizona. Have you got a microphone there, Mickey?
Yeah, I do, but it does work. Oh, yes. Whoa, what is this? I never...
Mickey was a wonderful cook. He used to... the Dutch crew tended to like pork chops and potatoes and whatever, and we preferred a little more exotic food, and Mickey certainly gave us exotic food, Johnny, with a special ingredient.
That's not true.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, I think Teun has a story as well about the food.
Yeah, this is Teun Visser. Teun was our chief engineer on board the ship.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to come over here. It's unfortunately a couple of years ago I was not able to come over here, but I really enjoyed to see all the people over here after a long time. One of the memories I know about Mickey was actually he was not only excellent for the breakfast, the lunch and dinner, but also something after the coffee, and that was a kind of dessert. Yeah, and he was really a specialist with cakes and whatever. And one of the memories I know that we were sitting all together in the mess room, and we were joining, of course, all the cakes from Mickey. And then he was asking also Captain, and that was Mr. Jaap Taal, a real fishing man. Captain, you want to have also a piece of cake? He said, yes, of course. So we give him a quite big piece, and he starts smiling and become funny and more. So after a while, after the second round of coffee, Captain, you want another piece? Oh, yes. Well, finally we have to carry him real stoned back to his cabin. That was my memory. One of the best memories what I know about most of the specialities of Mickey. Food and everything in the kitchen. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
That's a lovely memory.
Lovely memory. Thank you, Teun.
Very nice memory.
I suppose when you think of pirate radio, anything that has pirate in front of it, it's never going to be permanent. It's only going to be temporary. You know, it's going to end sooner or later. So we used to make the most of it on board and have a lot of fun and play lots of practical jokes. And I want to bring Paul in here because Paul was the subject of many practical jokes. When Paul joined us in 1973, he'll forgive me for saying this, you were a real anorak.
Oh, absolutely. I still am.
I mean, a serious anorak.
Yep, absolute, total anorak. I arrived in a three-piece suit, and I think I probably left in
Still wearing it?
Oh, it's different one. No. I came as an anorak. I'd known Spangles and Robin for quite a while. And the story of how I turned up is a bit bizarre because I was working in the clubs. I'd paid my way through college working in the clubs, and I got a bit too fond of the money. The money's pretty good working in clubs, certainly better than Caroline, but I just wanted to go and work on Radio Caroline. So I got a phone call one day from Kate. Kate was Chris's first wife, and she said, Chris would like you to come out to Caroline and be a disc jockey. So I said, great, brilliant. And I think I said, how's Louise? Because Louise was a little girl, she hadn't been very well, and put the phone down. And then next morning, I was there at Caroline House in Van Hogendorpstraat. And she said, oh, you've arrived. We didn't know if you were coming. You didn't say. So I said, well, it's a crazy question. You said, do I want to join Radio Caroline? And to me, that was like asking a kid in the 60s who had a guitar, do you want to join the Beatles? Because Caroline, and especially Chris's aspirations for it, was still going to be a big-time radio station. And he had some fantastic plans, and of course the 389 international service and 259 with the money-producing Dutch service. And we had a fantastic Canadian radio sales guy who was out there pitching with Chris, trying to find advertising, and they'd sold it as, Caroline was going to be the next biggest radio station in Europe within weeks. And that was Terry Bate. I think Terry Bate also did Caroline a lot of good. But I think also there should be a bit of a hand for all the backroom people who worked in Caroline. A lot of you guys know of the disc jockeys who were big names, and some of the engineers as well. But there were people in the background who really made Caroline work in those days, and I think in those days 2 names that stick out who really did the work. One, of course, was Kate, Chris's wife. I mean, Chris did about 9 jobs. Kate also worked really, really hard, didn't she, Andy?
She did.
And the other one, of course, was the one lady, she was a young girl at the time, who followed Chris and Kate and who ran Caroline for probably a year afterwards, and that was Charlotte Ribbelink. So let's have a big hand for them.
All right.
Oh, there she is.
There's Charlotte in front.
and Charlotte pulled in the money as well.
She was the Caroline whore. But a lovely one. Charlotte's going to... Will you come up, Charlotte, and talk about the arrival of Radio Mi Amigo in a few moments? But before then, I think back in the 70s, there was a wonderful community just off the coast, and we had wonderful relationships with the people on the Mebo and people on the Veronica ship, and one name that springs to mind is the legendary Aaron Langeberg, who was a most wonderful character, and he once told me how he managed to get into one of the Queen of England's garden parties by saying he was some Dutch duke or related to the Dutch royal family, and just walked in and was entertained all afternoon by the Queen and Prince Philip. He was that sort of character, a great raconteur. And Robbie, we used to go over to the Veronica for drinks and the Mebo, and there is a story of when you and Peter Chicago and myself one night decided to pay a visit to the Mebo.
Very famous story. Very famous story. Well, certainly as far as we're concerned, because we nearly killed ourselves, not for the first time. It was a lovely evening when we left the Mi Amigo to go over to the Mebo. And we decided to get the rubber boat and jump in the rubber boat, and we were put across, and the Mebo was getting larger and larger, and then about halfway across we realised that something was happening. The boat was actually starting to capsize like a V shape, and what we'd forgotten to do is put the board in the middle to hold the boat together. So Chicago was actually holding, literally he had his arm round the engine and just slowly manoeuvring the boat so it didn't capsize inwards, and we gradually we manoeuvred towards the Mebo, and it literally was a couple of days after I'd left R&I for the last time, and we arrived, and luckily for us, the ship's crew had forgotten to put the ladders up. Now, something that I've never known that in my time with the Mebo. The ship's crew always were very diligent about pulling the ladders up at night, especially after the incident we heard about this morning, the fire incident, and several other incidents as well. So we were very surprised, and we were very lucky. So we climbed aboard, and there was no one to be seen on the Mebo at all. So we went down to the studio, and Robin Adcroft, Robin Banks, was on the air, and he turned around and looked at me, and then looked back to what he was doing, and then he looked again and he said, "What are you doing here?"
He didn't. He said, "What the fuck are you doing
well,
here?"
Exactly, yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm being very kind. But he was amazed that we were on board, one, and two, that we managed to get across in the rubber dinghy. And I don't know if you were here watching the R&I footage earlier on, you would have seen a beautiful, pristine R&I rubber dinghy that was on that footage before. And the rubber dinghy, the R&I rubber dinghy, was in a fantastic condition. It was, as I say, pristine, and there was never any problems with that. But the Caroline one, just like the Mi Amigo in a way, was a bit dodgy. But we got across, and we had a fantastic time. We laughed about it afterwards, and they provided drinks as well, which was very nice.
But the captain wasn't very pleased.
The captain
to say the least.
Yeah, he wasn't very pleased. In fact, first of all, he wasn't going to fix our rubber boat.
No.
And then gradually the crew all sort of woke up, and everybody got up, and that was it. They said, yeah, okay. And we got back to the Mi Amigo safely.
We'll tell you the tale of the arrival of Radio Mi Amigo in a second, but sadly Michael Hagler, who was one of our most talented broadcasters, can't be with us. He's in New Zealand, but he made some amazing jingles and trails, and this is one he made for the Stonehenge Festival in 1974.
Radio Caroline extends an invitation to you and your friends to attend a free festival of life and happiness at Stonehenge in southern England on Midsummer's Day, June 21st, all in the spirit of LA. The Caroline LA Festival features humanity with yourself as the guest artist, so come as you are, prepared to share an experience in being with others on a very special day at a very special place. The Caroline LA Free Festival, Midsummer's Day, June 21st at Stonehenge. Bring whatever you need to enjoy the day, musical instruments, food, drink, whatever. Sunrise to sunset, a festival of love and life and you. The Caroline LA Festival, Midsummer's Day at Stonehenge.
I was there, but I can't remember a thing. Elija Vandenberg is also on stage with us. Good afternoon, Elija.
Good afternoon. Is it working? Yeah. All right.
Did you go to the Stonehenge Festival?
No.
But Andy,
Precise.
I don't know if you remember, but through Stonehenge, the Wallies developed, and they're still around, traveling.
I don't remember much about the Stonehenge Festival at all, I have to say.
Yeah, but Caroline
I think it was
started
due to something
the
somebody
movement.
gave me on a sugar lump.
Yeah, the Wallies.
I thought there was a D in the middle of Stonehenge.
Anyway, back in 1973, we started, after going through a fairly tricky period, to say the least, we started to make quite a bit of money. Our saviour was a man called Sylvan Tack, who was famous for his Susie Waffles. And Charlotte played an important part in the negotiations. Just briefly remind us how Sylvan Tack joined the organisation.
I was in the office with 8 telephones and no money, and a ship out there without any money, nothing. And some moment a rover car drove up with Eddie the Book and a guy called Roger, and they said, "We want to buy the ship." I said, "Well, it's not for sale, it's somebody's baby." And I made a phone call to England saying that maybe this is the one. So after calling back probably 12 times, we made an appointment with Sylvan Tuck, and in the end we signed a contract in the Okura Hotel on a serviette. And that was the beginning to have the money to start buying the mast that we see on this picture, which actually was made by Adrian van Landschot in somewhere in Belgium, but he couldn't pay for it. So I drove down with somebody's brother in a truck, and we crashed somewhere on the way. And we quickly bought a mast, and we quickly drove it to Scheveningen, and it was built in no time, because it's in those days we still had educated welders, and it was on. And then the rest followed, and I had to buy generators and employ people and captains, and that's how it started, the Mi Amigo. And then of course Sylvan Tuck had to flee to Spain.
Well, we have to wind up in a few moments, but can we start with you, Charlotte, because you were very close to Ronan. As everyone knows here, Ronan has been diagnosed with vascular dementia, and we're a friend's coming up in a moment who went to see him a couple of weeks ago, so we'll give you the latest on Ronan's condition. But some memories of Ronan from all of us just before we take our bows.
Well, what we forget also, and actually this is why I actually wanted to sit behind here. I didn't really want to talk about everything in the past, but what I think is the most beautiful thing out of my Caroline experience is that it was not about money at all. It was about an idea of leaving a better future behind. We were still in the Cold War, which seems like it's happening right now again. It's like never left us. And it was about tolerance. It was about living together. And it was fantastic music, especially those days that I was around. And also Radio Caroline, before we became Caroline again with Mi Amigo, it was Radio Seagull. And Radio Seagull was in a few months' time named by a survey of the Sunday Times as the best radio station of Europe. And that was also due because of a bunch of American freaks that came on board bringing the most amazing records. And then through Mike Heckler, who was very good in putting jingles together of the message of living together and loving awareness, and DA, defensive awareness. And although everybody was laughing at Ronan and thinking, he was kind of crazy, it did carry some magic around, because if you think the chances that was taken and the dangerous things that were done by Mi Amigo, and we had no contact on board, like nowadays everybody is in tweet and talking and calling. We had no contact with the ship. There were people on board there in the 4th Gill 9 anchor chain broke. Then somebody from the Home Office called us saying, "I'm Mr. A. Let me warn you, your anchor chain has broken. You have to get the ship out, otherwise we have to confiscate it," in the middle of the night. And then we got it together. So it was a lot of magic, and I think that loving awareness did carry something, and I'm very grateful. Ronan O'Reilly was a really good guy. He still is. And he did help a lot of people. It was not only about money, and we should never forget that.
Clive. Clive Correll has joined us. Clive was an engineer back in the... We haven't even said hello yet.
No, I know. Sorry
good
about
afternoon.
that.
You've flown in from Mexico, I believe.
That's right, yeah. I remember Ronan as the most incredibly gentle guy, and certainly the guy that gave me the most unusual job interview I've ever had in my life. I was leaving Capital at the time, and Russ Tollerfield asked me to go down to the Casserole restaurant in Chelsea, where I met him at about 6 p.m. And he was surrounded by a bunch of Class A people. And I remember the questions went, what do you think about politicians? So I said, as far as I'm concerned, they're all criminals. He said, good, good. He said, the second question, are you any good? I said, well, I have never had any complaints yet. He said, fine. Can you get out there tomorrow? So I said, give me a night to wind up my flat and probably give me about 3 days, basically. But one thing I do remember most of all about Ronan, that he was strangely, to my eyes anyway, very anti-drug, actually. And whenever we played records too often involving drug references, the ship to shore would tend to go and Ronan would be on the other end complaining. And strangely, he recruited me because I was completely unaware of the fact that when I went out there, I must confess, since the statutes run out now, I did take a huge quantity of substances with me. I took a load of MDA and did a 2-hour program on acid, actually. And this was nearly my undoing because I was running this space program for 2 hours, which I'd spent 2 weeks putting together in the record library. And at one time, being the engineer as well, I decided to go and check how the transmitter was getting on about halfway through the program, and of course I was completely tripping. And so I went down into the forward hold, and I stood there watching all the meters going and the oscilloscope display, thinking, wow, this is great, you know. And then I think I was playing Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun by Pink Floyd at the time, and the record ran out, you know, and I stood there thinking, why doesn't the stupid disc jockey put the next record on? You know? Then I realized after about 30 seconds that I was the stupid disc jockey, and so legged it back up to the studio again and carried on.
Actually, what Clive just said, I have to say, was also reminded us of Dick Palmer, of course. Marvellous chap that he was, not only the captain at one stage, but also did a brilliant show, like Mickey used to do his one-off show, not only a marvellous cook, but also brilliant music. And Dick Palmer used to have this programme called Dick Palmer's Night Trip, which we really enjoyed. All of us used to crowd into the studio because Dick would sit there with his turntable spinning around, absolutely out of it, and saying, crikey, what are we going to do at the end of this? Which record's coming on next? And he used to say at the end of it, what was it? What can I say about that wasn't said in the music?
Bless him.
Marvellous chap.
Do you remember what Andy and Tony did to you? The practical joke we played on you? They came to me one evening and said, Johnny's in the studio, and you know, as we know, we've got to take it off for maintenance a little bit early, so don't tell Johnny you're taking the transmitter off. He said, we'll leave him thinking it's running on air. And so we did that. We took it off air, and then Andy and Tony and I, we all burst into the studio where Johnny was. And this was John B. Mayer, right? Yeah, and you were involved in that, right?
Yes.
And we started. We waited until he just opened the microphone, and then you guys started making all sorts of terrible references about his predilection for little boys and things like that. I have never seen such a reaction in my life, actually.
And just a final on Ronan. Johnny mentioned Dick Palmer. There was a period in 1973 when Dick was desperate for money and he hadn't been paid for weeks and weeks and weeks. And Ronan went out to the ship to pay him, and it coincided when Dick was actually coming off on the tender. So Dick was paid his money by Ronan on the ship. They got on the tender, and by the time they got back to Scheveningen, Ronan had actually blagged the money back off him. Can we have Mike Plumley? Mike, is he here?
Yes, he is.
Oh, yeah. Mike is a dear friend of Ronan, and as you know, Ronan is suffering from dementia at the moment, and Mike went over to see him in Ireland a couple of weeks ago, so he will now update us on the situation.
Yes.
Hi everyone. Hello. Testing. Yeah. Yes, I saw Ronan about 3 weeks ago, and he's being very well looked after, living in Bettystown in north of Dublin. He has got vascular dementia, but he's in very good state, being well looked after, and in a very happy state. So we did a lot of laughing, and don't know whether he fully remembers me, but probably does. But anyway, he's basically just to really, Andy asked me just to say that he's actually fine and being looked after really well, and he's very much on and up. And I shall relay to him when I see him, whether he'll fully absorb everything, I don't know, but I'll certainly tell him about today and the events in Rochester Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. It's nice to have ladies, isn't it?
It is.
I always thought it was so sad that Pirate Radio was full of so many men.
Oh, yeah.
We have Andy didn't. We have another Caroline 70 session coming up in just a moment. So one lot will go off and another lot will come on. And while they're doing that, if I can add one more thing about the lovely Tony Allen.
All of us have been living DA for far too long.
Tony Allen, I first knew in hospital radio in Glasgow. And Tony Allen is the only man in my life who I've been genuinely fond of because he called me shit features. And I always thought, coming from Tony Allen, shit features was probably an enormous compliment. He also did me one huge favour once when we were both working on Chris Carey's Radio Nova in Camberley. I made a program for Christmas Day called Jingles All the Way, which was the history of the radio jingle. The sort of program that nobody in this room would have been particularly interested in, I know. And it was a very complicated program with hundreds and hundreds of tape inserts and cart inserts. And it was so complicated that we reckoned it needed two of us to drive it. And Tony Allen volunteered to stay on to drive this program for me. And as the program was about to start, Tony leaned over to say something to me. And if you knew Tony, you'd know that if Tony leaned over to say something to you, you never knew what was coming next. And he leaned over and he whispered in my ear, "Listen, darling," he said, "I've stayed sober just for you." Which I took to be the ultimate compliment. Tony Allen was a lovely man. I loved him dearly, and we all miss him very much indeed.